All right, I believe we are officially live. It's kind of messed with this light a little bit. It's very bright, actually. It's making me look like a ghost. But anyway, hello everybody and welcome. We're gonna wait for everybody to go ahead and get in here. Let me post on Instagram and let me kind of double check that everything is up and running. But it does look like we're here and get in. Okay, I think we are live. So let's see if we've got, yeah, all right. So we will begin here in one moment. But yeah, we're going to be talking today about some grammar that you can use in a job interview. So let me post again on on Instagram, see if we can get some more people here. Actually, let's do this. Go live, see how this works. Three, two, one. Hello. All right, so now we are live here on Instagram, but mostly just to tell everybody to go to YouTube. So, hey everybody, tuning in here on Instagram. We're changing the structure of the live stream. So, most of what we're doing is going to be over on YouTube. So, if you look at my story, you guys can go over there on our YouTube channel because we're going to be using presentation and it's much easier to be able to explain things and see things if you're using YouTube. So I'm just here temporarily to tell you guys that if you'd like to watch, you got to go over to our YouTube channel, which is Business as Usual English. So let me see how we can set this up, and everybody waiting here on YouTube will begin in just 1 minute. Let me see if I can comment. I don't know if this will be a clickable link, but anyway, we'll be over on the YouTube channel. We'll be doing a presentation about some grammar that you can use for your next job interview. So I'm gonna go ahead. Actually, let's try this. Maybe we'll do this. I'm gonna try something new today. I'm gonna put my yeah. We'll stay here on both, but you guys won't be able to see the screen, but I'll still be explaining everything here on Instagram. But anyway, go check us out on the YouTube channel. So, um, today, what we're going to be doing is going over some grammar for job interviews. So, if anybody is here, tell me, does anyone have any job interviews coming up? How do you guys feel? Has anyone ever done a job interview in English? Okay. So, we're going to go ahead and get started. So if you guys want to see, let me show you here what we have on YouTube. We're going to be showing the full PowerPoint presentation so you guys can follow along. But here on Instagram, we'll only have the audio. So I'll set this up here. But anyway, so we'll go ahead and get started. And of course, if you guys have any questions, let me know in the messages and we will answer them as they come up. So, we're going to be talking about the main thing we're going to be talking about is how to speak about past tense in a job interview. Excuse me. So, when you're interviewing for a job, obviously, it's all right, I have some stomach problems today. But when you're interviewing for a job, you're going to be asked about obviously your past experiences. So, what we'll be talking about today is mostly two very simple ways to speak about the past in a job interview. So in English, we have pretty much eight tenses, or no, I guess we have about six tenses that could be considered past tenses. But in a job interview, realistically, you only need to use about two or three of these tenses. So you can use more, but if your English is maybe intermediate level, B1, and you don't want to think too much, and you're already really nervous about speaking in a job interview, well, it's better just to think about here are two simple tenses you can use to talk about your work experience in a way that communicates um, what you've done and communicates that you're able to speak confidently in English. So we'll go ahead and get started. And again, over on YouTube, we have a full presentation that you guys can see. Here, we're just using the phone on Instagram, so we're not going to be able to show that and the live stream. It's just a bit complicated. But anyway, we'll go ahead and read here. So to begin, I'm going to be showing you guys two options of how you could potentially talk about your work history in English. Now, one of them is good, and one of them is, frankly, it's bad. So, I'll read both of them, and then if you guys could tell me which one do you think is better. So, option number one. In 2020, I led a team at a logistics company. The pandemic started, and our operations changed. I worked from home and managed the staff. It was difficult, but I learned a lot. I stayed in that job for 2 years, and then I changed roles and worked in training. So that is option one. Now, option two. In 2020, I was leading a team at a logistics company when the pandemic hit. Overnight, our operations model had to change. I was working from home and managing remote staff for the first time, which taught me a lot about flexibility and communication. I stayed in that position for 2 more years before moving into a training role. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and close it over here on Instagram. But if you guys could tell me on YouTube, which one do you think sounds better? Option number one or option number two? Which one is better? And if, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, you guys can't even read option number two. Give me 1 second. I am a little bit too big. Where could I put myself? Um, Not. We can do this. Since we have full screen, we can just do that. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Okay. Okay. That will work. So, what do you guys think? Option number one or two? So, all right, very good. So, exactly. Option number two is the better option. So, and the reason is you have more variety. So, you have the past simple tense, and you also have the past continuous tense, which is there to give context. So, you say, I was leading a team. It kind of gives you more context to the situation. And it sounds much more natural to say it this way. So, let's see if we can set it up like this. All right, one moment. I'm going to play with this again to see if we can move that out of the way. And I'm going to move myself up to the top because usually I don't put anything that important in the top part. Actually, we'll do this. I'll go here at the top right. Okay, so right. Option two is much better because we have more information. Okay. So very simply, these two tenses are, we don't have any concurrent viewers at the moment, so I'm going to take a second to post again. We will continue. So, all right. So the first tense we're going to talk about is the past simple tense. Now, this is the most common past tense in English, and we use it just to describe completed actions. Now, when you're going to be telling a story, you use this for most of the main events in your story. So, I managed a team. I worked at a logistics company. Or we changed our system in 2020. Now, this past continuous, it's like in Spanish when you would say, Yo estaba trabajando en ese negocio, or something like that. So it's to describe kind of ongoing actions in the past, and is used to set the scene or give context for the main events in your work history. So you could say, while I was working at this company, I was managing a team, or we were working remotely. So it describes something that was happening for a longer period of time, and it also gives context to the rest of your experience. So I was learning a new software, things like this. All right. So now let's get into something that we call templates. So, oops. So a template is pretty much a structure that you can memorize and use and swap out different verbs as you go. So, for example, if you say, I was doing something when something happened. So, it's very common you have one thing that's ongoing and then it's interrupted by something else. For example, I was managing a team when the new system launched. Or I was preparing a client proposal when they changed the deadline. So when you're telling your work history, a lot of times you have one period that's kind of ongoing. So I was living in Mexico when I started working at my new job. So I was living in Mexico is ongoing when something changes. So you can take this phrase and try to customize it for your own situation. All right. Template two. While I was something, I something. So while I was working at a bank, I learned to manage high pressure situations. While I was leading the project, I built a new process for reporting. So it's pretty simple. Here, you have kind of one thing that's going on, and again, something interrupts. So if you need to talk about different jobs that you had and things that you learned from them, you could say, yeah, while I was in university, I learned to organize my time and make new friends. All right, very good. So, template number three. At the time, I was doing something and then I did something. So, you can use this one if you need to show some kind of a change in your work history. So at the time, I was working in finance, and then I transitioned into tech. So this at the time I was working in finance shows a longer period of time than you transitioned into tech, or then you got promoted. You could say I was working at my new job and then I had my first child, or something like this. And the idea is just to give a context, because when you're talking about your work experience, you want to be interesting. You want to tell a story, even if the job you're applying for isn't a job that involves a lot of human interaction. Nobody wants to interview or work with someone who is boring. So the more entertaining you can be, just kind of the more engaging you can be when you're giving answers, the better chance you have of getting the job. And so by memorizing these templates and customizing them for yourself, you can start to use these in interviews and in other situations. So, for example, maybe the job interviewer asks you, um, so tell me, why did you transition from working in finance to working in tech? So you could say, well, at the time I was living in New York City, and then the pandemic happened. I lost my job in finance and decided I would pursue my passion of studying IT or something like this. So it's just a way to kind of paint a better picture than just saying I worked in finance, then I moved to California, now I work in IT. It's just much better. So the last template here, during my time at whatever company, I was doing some job or performing some task, and so it's good for organizing and showing multiple tasks. So you could say, during my time at Globex Corp, I was leading weekly meetings and I redesigned the reporting system. So kind of to show what your regular responsibilities were. So I could say, for example, um, during my time living in the United States, I was working with my high school friend and flipping houses, something like this. At my last job, I was managing logistics and launched a cost cutting initiative. So, again, this is all about just giving context and giving a little bit more detail to your story. So, we'll go ahead and we'll move on. Do we have any questions so far? All right, very good. And before we continue, I'm going to share a copy of this presentation with all of you there in the chat. Looks like we have one person at the moment. So yeah, if you have any questions, of course, feel free to leave it in the chat and I will answer you. It doesn't even have to be about job interviews. It could be any English related question. But I'm going to put this link here so that if you like, you can go back later and you can view, especially these templates. So these templates are very helpful because you can customize them and memorize them and use them in your own speech. So, but yeah, now we're going to do a little bit of practice. So, um, what we'll do is what I want you guys to do is to fill in the blank either with the past simple or the past continuous. So those are the only two options that are available are the past simple and the past continuous. So for example, and so if you want, type in the chat, for example, number one, graduated, or number one was graduating. So type these in the chat, and then I'll let you guys know if you're correct or incorrect. So here we go. Number one, when I graduated. Very good. So this is kind of a one-time action. It's not a continuous action. So you would say, when I graduated from university, I for a job in marketing. So is this going to be continuous or simple? Well, it could be either. So you could say looked if it was like kind of a one-time thing and you want to say, oh, I looked for a job in marketing, but I would probably say I was looking because it's a continuous and ongoing process. I finally got hired. Exactly. Finally got hired by a small creative agency because it's a one-time thing. I got hired on my first day while all right. So this is a key word, while. Typically with the word while, we're going to use continuous. So we can say while I was walking, because this is happening while I was walking into the office, everyone was preparing for a major client presentation because this is something that is ongoing. If you said everyone prepared for a client presentation, it would mean that they did it maybe before you walked in, perhaps. But if everyone is actively preparing, you would say everyone was preparing for a major client presentation. My manager did something quickly. So we would say he introduced me quickly, and then I could help with some final slides. We would say then asked if I could help with some final slides while I was editing. Very good, because we have while, and this is kind of a continuous tense. One of the senior designers spilled coffee all over his laptop. Yes, so spill. And if you guys don't know spill, this is when a liquid comes out on accident. So for example, I have some water and I'm drinking it and it goes onto my shirt. I would say I spilled water onto my shirt. That's what this word means, to spill something. But this would be a one-time action. The next one is he, but luckily you'd say he panicked because it's really, it could be either. You could say was panicking or panicked. It depends on how you want to express this idea. So if he panicked, it kind of means one and done. But if he was panicking, it means this is happening for a long time. So he was panicking, but luckily I brought. Very good. So kind of a one-time action. I brought my laptop that day. So we just switched to mine. All right. Do we have any questions at all so far? Let me see. Let me actually put the, maybe I can, okay, very good. Put the chat here so I can see if there's any questions that come in, guys. All right, very good. So we'll go ahead and we'll do a little bit more. Now we'll move on to an easier one. Wait, where did they go? Why can I not see them? Okay, all right. So now we have a sentence, and you see there are two blanks in the sentence. And I want you guys to pick the correct answer, A, B, or C. So read the sentence, read the options, and then let me know what you think. So my ankle while the office. Which one do you guys think? Okay, we gotta move that out. Okay, very good. So A, I injured my ankle while I was walking down the stairs at the office. Very good. All right. He too fast when the accident on the way to a client meeting. So this word when is very important here. Say he was driving. Very good. He was driving too fast when he got or had an accident. So was driving and had the accident. Very good. All right. Weather delay. It was raining heavily when we left. So raining heavily, this is something that's more of a continuous action. And left could be really, it could be either, to be honest. A lot of times there's situations where it makes sense to use both. Because you could say we left the conference like it's a one time thing, but you could also say we were leaving like it was a longer process. So this one really could be D or A for number three. Just depends on how you want to communicate this. But native speakers would say it both ways. So it was raining heavily when we were leaving the conference or when we left the conference. And again, left would be one time thing, and we're leaving would be talking about it as if it's a longer process. Like we walk out the door, we go to the car, we talk to some people, we were leaving. Like it's a continuous thing. Number four, your call because I to the team. So what do we say here? Right, letter A. So I didn't hear your call. So past simple because I was presenting to the team. So I was in the process of presenting to the team, and for that reason, I didn't hear your call. Okay. This morning, I early and all the documents before the meeting. Okay, very good. So this is going to be arrived and prepared. Letter A. This morning, I arrived early and prepared all the documents before the meeting. Right. Number six. When I met her, she business formal, a dark suit with heels. Okay. So you would say when I saw, first one would be saw because it's kind of a one-time thing. If you wanted to say it was continuous, you would have to say looking at or watching. But when you see something, it's just instantaneous. We never say I was seeing, really. We would say I was looking at, or perhaps I was watching. But in this case, when I saw her at the office, and you'd say she was wearing, because wearing it's something, yeah, you do it continuously. She was wearing clothing all day, so she was wearing this in that moment. But okay, very good. So, all right, now we're going to move on to the second topic, which is all about how to buy time when you ask a question and you don't know the answer to it. So this is quite common in an interview. You get asked a question and you can't think of the answer. Maybe it's a question about a personal story and you can't think of a good story, or it's just a question that's difficult to answer and you really don't know how to respond. So you need a little bit of time to think, especially when you're speaking in your second language. So this next section is called How to Buy Time, and we've got a few different tricks for you guys. So the most simple one is just to be honest and tell them that you need a little bit of time to think. So here are some phrases you can use for that. You can say, "Oh, that's a great question. Let me think about it for a second." Or, "Do you mind if I think about it for a second?" You could say, "Huh, I hadn't thought about that before." And then take a second to think. You could also say, "Let me take a moment to gather my thoughts." Or, "Huh, good point. I'll need a second to consider it." So these are good phrases, but be very careful not to use them every single question. I heard a story from one of my students. She was in a meeting, or maybe it was an interview. She was sitting there, kind of watching an interview of this, yeah, kind of one of her colleagues. And every time they asked this guy a question, he said, "Good, good question. Great question. Good question. Great question. And of course, everyone knows that this is a kind of a strategy to buy time, but if you overuse it, then it gets quite annoying, and it becomes quite clear that you don't understand or that you're really not prepared for the interview. So you can use these, but try to vary the tactics you use. So one tactic is just tell them you need some time to think. So now we'll move on to the second tactic. All right. Second tactic for buying time. This is to rephrase the question. So if they ask you a question and you want some more time to think, you can kind of ask them for clarification by rephrasing and saying the question back to them. So, for example, so you're asking how I would handle the situation. Is that right? And so as you're saying this, you have more time to think. And then, of course, they're going to respond, yes, that's right. And they may even repeat the question. And that will give you even more time to think. So, a couple other ways you could rephrase the question. If I understand correctly, you're asking about my experience with remote teams. So, and of course, always end your intonation on an up intonation. You're asking about my experience with remote teams, and that will show that, of course, you're curious. And the other one, you're wondering what I do if the deadline changed unexpectedly. So these are just some ways that you can rephrase the question, buy yourself a little bit of extra time if you don't know the answer. And of course, these strategies also work in meetings or really any situation where you need a little bit more time to think. Maybe because of your English level, or maybe because the question is quite difficult. All right. So the third one. This one is to start with what we call a soft generalization. So a soft generalization is a it's like an empty statement that you can use in most situations, and it just allows you you're just saying something that buys you more time. So for example, in situations like that, I usually try to stay calm and assess the options. So maybe they ask you what's called a behavioral question, where they ask you a question like, what would you do if one of your coworkers asked you to do something that was unethical? You could say, well, in situations like that, I usually try to stay calm and assess the options. I think the first thing I would do is, and so you have this set phrase that allows you to think a bit more. All right. Another great question, another great generalization that really depends on the context. But one thing I often consider is, so this one is fantastic because saying it depends um, is a great non-answer. You hear political people use this all the time, and of course, you do want to be direct and answer the question, but it can buy you a little bit of time. So they say, oh, maybe it's a technical question. Which of these two KPIs do you think is more important? You can say, well, it really depends on the context. Um, but when it comes to productivity, I think this KPI is more important because, and then you can give your answer. So starting with something that really depends on the context is a great way to answer a question, especially maybe an open-ended technical question. It'll give you some more time to think. Now, um, if you're asked about kind of a strategy or what you might do in a situation, how you might solve a problem, you could start your answer by saying, well, there are a few ways to approach that, but here's what I might do. So this phrase, there are a few ways to approach that, can be used to start many different sentences. And that's a good way to start. And while you're saying that, you can start to formulate your answer. All right. So the last thing we're going to do today is talk about what I call language templates or language structures. Now, pretty much any language it's just a collection of different structures that people use. So there's hundreds of these different structures, but in a job interview, you kind of know beforehand what are the types of questions they're going to ask. They're going to ask you technical questions. They're going to ask you questions about your strengths, weaknesses, your personal experiences, and things like this. So you can memorize and practice a few of these templates before, and that way, when they ask you the question, you don't have to translate word for word everything in your head. You don't have to sit there and say, okay, una de mis fortalezas más grandes es, okay, one of my, you can just memorize the whole phrase and put in a few different points. So here, for example, if they ask you, what are your strengths or what are some skills that you're really confident in, why should we hire you? These types of questions. You can say, well, one of my main strengths is, and I think that's important because. So the strength is this, and it's important because. Or my main strength is this, it helps me to. So you can talk about why it's important, how it helps you, or how you developed it. So one of my main strengths is one of my main strengths is persistence. It's something I developed when I first started playing basketball in high school. And here's how I've applied it. When I was first working in sales, so you can have these phrases in your head, and it allows you to just put in a word or a phrase without having to come up with a whole structure. Because really, the most challenging thing for a lot of students, including myself, is to put together the sentence. But if you memorize the sentence and you just have to swap out a word, then it's much easier on your brain. So one of my all right, one of my main strengths is adaptability. And I think that's important because every client is different. It helps me stay calm in changing situations. I've developed this by working in fast-paced roles. So you can see if they ask you, oh, what are your strengths? Then you can answer in this format. And if you want to practice this, you can go click the link in the chat. You can look at this and kind of try to figure out how could I personalize this for me? And then think about, okay, how could I personalize it in another way? So one of my main strengths is confidence. One of my main strengths is being a team player. And then just kind of practice this format, and it's going to make it so much easier on the day of the interview. All right. Now, how do you talk about weaknesses or challenges? So if something comes up where they've asked you about a weakness, or a very common question in job interviews is, tell me about a challenge that you have overcome or an obstacle that you've overcome. You could use this one. So you could say, for example, um, managing my time is something I've struggled with, but here's what I've done about it. Now, instead of making my schedule when I wake up in the morning, I try to make my schedule the night before. And if you want to, yeah, and they ask you about a weakness, you could say, well, um, I used to do the bare minimum at work. I would leave at 4:45 instead of 5, but now I do this. So if you're trying to show your journey, show how you've grown as a professional. I used to do something, but now I do this. And used to, in this case, es como yo solía hacer algo. Yo solía dormir muy tarde y ya me madrugo todos los días o algo así. So I used to is como solía. So this is another very useful phrase in job interviews. And again, you can say something like, I'm still improving, but. So let's look here at the full example. That's something I've struggled with, delegating tasks. I used to try to do everything myself, but now I plan more clearly and assign roles early. I'm still improving, but I've made real progress. So you can see how you can use a few of these phrases. And of course, you can really take these different pieces and swap them out. So for me personally, I would say delegating tasks is something I've struggled with, and then you can really just take this and customize it. So if you have an interview, you know they'll ask you these types of questions. So it's good to practice this. All right. Now on to a difficult type of question for a lot of people, and myself included. This is what they call a behavioral question. So they'll ask you a question about like a interpersonal conflict. So tell me about a time when you had a disagreement with your boss or something like this. They'll kind of ask you about a story to see how you handled a particular difficult situation. And they teach this framework they call the STAR framework, and it's a simple structure. The S stands for situation. So first you want to describe the situation. And as we talked about earlier, we see this past continuous tense showing up again. So I was working as to kind of give the context. Oh, yes, I was working as a real estate agent and living in New York. I was working for this big firm when it happened. And then you talk about the task, the goal, what needed to be accomplished. So we needed to find new leads for clients, but we didn't have any available. Okay. So you can talk about the task or the kind of the problem as well. So this could be a task or a problem. So I was working in this company and here was the main task or problem. Then you could talk about the action. So here's the action I took. Here's what I decided to do. And then, of course, you want to talk about the result. And of course, you want to give a result that kind of paints you in a good light, that makes it's honest, of course, but also shows how you behaved and conducted yourself in a professional way. So, in the end, something happened. So, here's an example. Sure, I can give you an example. This happened when I was working as a team lead. We needed to reduce client complaints, so I created a feedback system and trained the team. In the end, complaints dropped by 40%. So you see this is quite a simple version, but it's pretty good. And this star framework will just allow you to think about, okay, how can I make a good answer when they ask me some question about, tell me about a time when you overcame a big challenge. Tell me about a time when you made a mistake and what did you learn from it? And it's just, okay, situation, task, what I did, and the result. And it's star, which in English is estrella. Entonces, si puedes responder a una pregunta así, vas a ser una estrella. No sé. But you can be a star if you memorize this framework. All right. Yeah. So, next one. This is what we call the conditional tense. So sometimes related to these behavioral questions, they'll ask you a hypothetical question, which usually involves the word if. So it's like, what would you do if this happened? Or, yeah, how would you handle this situation? So the key words to look for are if and would. And so this would be like in Spanish, you would say, ¿qué harías si tu jefe te pidiera hacer algo poco ético? Or something like that. And the way we respond in English is we start with if. So we say, if I were in that situation, I would, and then put the verb. So we say if followed by the past simple. Now, this is kind of weird because this has nothing to do with the past. It's about a hypothetical situation, but it's like to say, si yo fuera millonario, yo compraría una finca. So it's like this si yo fuera. So it's this subjunctive tense. So this past tense here, it's not actually related to the past. So you'd say, if I lived in Spain, I would live in Barcelona. If I won the lottery, I would buy a house. And so this is kind of the structure. If plus the past simple, and then the next phrase is would, followed by the simple verb. So, excuse me. So you can say this, and then you can just say, first, I would do this, then I would do this, and finally, I would do that. And you see that we also say I'd. So sometimes I would becomes I'd. All right. So here's an example. If I were managing a delayed project, I would focus on keeping everyone informed. First, I'd assess the reason for the delay, then I'd communicate it to the stakeholders. Finally, I'd follow up with a revised timeline. So this type of response is great, and it just allows you to really keep things simple in your mind because you can think, okay, first, then finally, first, second, third. So you don't have to think about some long, complicated answer. You can just say, okay, no, there's three things I would do this, and this. I think when you have a job interview or really any business speaking situation, if you can be concise and just very quick and say what you want to say in a very quick way, people really value efficiency and it makes you look smart. So if you can say something that is very good with very few words, then there's no need to say more. Sometimes people will speak and speak and speak, like I'm doing right now. And sometimes if you just speak and speak about something, it makes you seem like you don't know what you're talking about, or makes it seem, um, yeah, it's just not as good as saying first this, then that, finally that, and then leaving it there. It it portrays confidence. All right. So this one is very similar. So this is when you're giving an opinion. If they say, "What do you think is the most important quality in a leader?" You can say, "Well, I think this, and for three reasons. The first reason is this, the second reason is that, and the third reason is this other thing." So whenever you're asked your opinion, you can just say, "Okay, I think something for two reasons, for three reasons, and then reason one, two, three." Need some water. One moment. Yeah, so let's read this example. I think time management is key in this role, and there are three reasons. First, it helps with meeting deadlines. Second, it reduces stress. And finally, it shows respect for others' time. So, very simple, kind of have a structured list, get in and get out with a good answer. All right. Now, the last template we're going to look at today is another way to give your opinion, and we call this the pros and cons template. So, if someone asks you, what do you think? You can say, well, I think this for these reasons, or you can say, well, there are pros and cons to this solution, or advantages and disadvantages. So if you're not 100% sure, you can say, well, on the one hand, this, and on the other hand, that. But in the end, I think I kind of agree more with this one. So it's just a good way to organize your thoughts. So, for example, let me give you guys a live example. So, there is actually, I'll find the video and put it here. So, there's a cafe in Barcelona, actually. Let's see here. Barcelona. Let me find it on my other screen. But there's a cafe in Barcelona, and they have a lot of people who work remotely, and they are taking up tables all day long in their cafe. And these people really only buy like one or two things. They buy like a €1 coffee, and they stand there all day long. So let me show you guys.
My work is easy.
So this is a good video. You guys can watch this if you want. Um, but pretty much that's the main problem is these guys, they're there all day long. just as a place to work, and they only buy one item. And so, what the owner of this restaurant has done is he said, okay, that's fine. We're going to charge for time. So if you go to this coffee shop and you buy a coffee and you sit there for 30 minutes, you pay €1. But if you want to sit there for an hour, then you have to pay €3. And if you want to stay there for 2 hours, you have to pay maybe €5. And so this is obviously a bit of a controversial, um, yeah, a controversial topic. So if someone asks me, Grant, what do you think about that? I'll say, well, there are kind of two sides to this. On the one hand, I can understand the business owner because he only has about 6 tables in his cafe. And if someone is going to occupy a table and only spend €1, he's not going to be able to run a profitable business. But on the other hand, I feel like it could be a bit rude to customers who just want to come and relax and drink coffee, and they may feel like they're a bit rushed for time. But in the end, I agree with the restaurant owner because it's his business and he can do what he wants. So you guys can see that YouTube video there in the chat. If you're gonna want to watch it, it's just 2 minutes. It's quite an interesting topic about this business in Barcelona. But anyway, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. So that's all we've got for today. I put the link to this presentation and also to that YouTube video I mentioned in the messages. So if you guys want, you can click that. It's completely free and you can go through. And I would recommend you guys go back through, look at some of these templates and make them your own. And what I mean is just kind of take it and try to swap out words and figure out, okay, how could I actually use this to respond to a question? Okay, very good. Thank you, Claudia. Very good. I think that's fine because the business has to survive as long as you clarify from the start, you know what you're up against. Okay, very good. And yeah, this is a very good phrase, what you're up against as well. So yeah, that's a very good, well balanced opinion. Thank you. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put them there in the chat. We'll hang out here for a little bit to answer any questions. But yeah, that's all we have for today. So if you guys are interested, I do offer one-on-one or group classes for general and business English. And tomorrow at the same time at 7:30 Central Time, 7:30 Columbia Time in the evening, we'll be having a more relaxed session learning English with the news. So we'll be watching videos like um, yeah, like the one that we just saw here, looking at articles, and we'll just be looking and trying to find interesting phrases and yeah, new words and answering questions. So it'll be kind of a laid back stream. So if you guys want to spend a little bit of time with me Friday night, come back tomorrow here on YouTube. I'm not going to be doing it as much on Instagram just because it's hard to have the small screen. And I really prefer to have the bigger screen so that you guys can actually learn more. And yeah, but anyway. Oh, well, yeah. Thank you, Claudia, for being here as well. But yeah, I think that's all we got here for today. So thank you guys so much, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.